We're about to dive into a really dark and honestly a pretty terrifying corner of American history. It's a story that haunted immigrant communities not with monsters or ghosts, but with something as simple as a piece of paper. A letter that meant the Black Hand had found you.
Seriously, just take a second and imagine it. You've worked so hard. You've built a new life, maybe a little shop. You've got your family. Things are good. And then one day, you get a letter. And you can tell right away it's not a friendly note. It's something else.
The message is raw, maybe scrawled in broken Italian, but there is absolutely no mistaking what it means. A demand for a huge amount of money, followed by the most terrifying threat imaginable. And it's all sealed with a symbol that just screamed fear. Maybe a skull, or a dagger, or just that simple, chilling black handprint. Now, for thousands of successful Italian immigrants, from the 1890s all the way into the 1920s, this wasn't just some movie plot. This was their reality, a paralyzing, terrifying reality. This was the calling card of the Mano Nera, the Black Hand.
So what exactly was the Black Hand? This is where we hit the single biggest myth about it, and it's one we need to clear up right away before we go any further.
See, this is the key difference. The Black Hand was not one giant, organized group like the Mafia. It was a method. Think of it more like a criminal playbook for extortion, used by tons of small, separate street gangs. They weren't in it for long-term control like the Mafia was. Nah, they wanted your money and they wanted it right now.
And the name itself kind of gives the game away. Mano Nera is just Italian for Black Hand. It came directly from those scary symbols they'd stamp on the letters. The name described the tactic, not some big unified criminal empire.
Now, these gangs had a whole toolbox of intimidation. They'd use bombings, arson, you name it. But there was one threat that stood way, way above all the others in its pure, brutal effectiveness. Let's look at how they turned a family's greatest love into their greatest weapon.
It always followed this terrifying pattern of escalation. First, you get the letter. If you dare to ignore it, they send a warning. Maybe a bomb goes off outside your shop. But the final act, that's what broke people. They would kidnap a member of your family, very often one of your children.
And that's why it was so diabolically effective. It wasn't just a crime anymore, it was pure psychological terrorism. It just completely bypassed any thoughts about money or fighting back and went straight for your most primal fear. When faced with that kind of horror, what could you do? Most families just paid. Quietly, quickly, anything to get their loved one back safe. So this brings up the obvious question, right? Why didn't these victims just go to the police? Well, the answer to that really shows you the deep-seated fear that trapped entire communities in a code of silence. I mean, just look at this. You were caught in a totally impossible spot. For one, many immigrants didn't trust the American police, who often didn't understand their language or their culture. But even worse was the absolute terror of retaliation. Going to the cops wasn't just risky, it felt like signing a death warrant. And this created this awful, vicious cycle, where the more silent people were, the more powerful the criminals became. But a reign of terror like this, it can't last forever. The tide did begin to turn, thanks to some incredibly brave people from inside the community, and also because of some huge shifts in the American underworld. And a huge part of that change was this man, Lieutenant Joseph Petrosino of the NYPD. As an Italian-American himself, he got it. He understood the community, and he understood the criminals preying on them. He became this incredible symbol of resistance. And he wasn't just a symbol, he got results. We're talking over 500 criminals that he and his squad either arrested or got deported. He was making a real dent, proving that these gangs were not invincible. Now, Patrocino's work was incredibly dangerous. So dangerous, in fact, that he was assassinated in 1909. But his legacy lived on. It inspired others, and by around 1915, you start seeing victims fighting back. But the real nail in the coffin, that was prohibition in 1920. All of a sudden, the quick cash from extortion seemed like pocket change compared to the fortunes you could make from illegal booze. Organized crime was evolving, and these crude, violent tactics just became obsolete. So, after all that, what do we take away from this dark chapter? The Black Hand was more than just a crime wave. It was this violent, critical stepping stone in the evolution of organized crime in America. So when we look back, it's really clear. The Black Hand was a tactic, a brutal method, not some unified army. It thrived on psychological terror and on a community's fear and silence. And ultimately, it served as this bridge
this violent transition from the kind of banditry of the old world to the sophisticated organized crime syndicates that were just around the corner. And that leaves us with one last, kind of tough thought. The Black Hand wasn't some outside invader. These were crimes that grew from within the very communities they terrorized. And it forces us to ask a question that's still relevant today. How does a community even begin to heal, to trust again, when the enemy wasn't a stranger, but one of their own?